You ever hear a sound that nobody else seems to notice? For thousands of people all over the world, that's not just a weird passing moment, it's their life. It's this constant, maddening thing known as the hum. It's a persistent, low-frequency drone that haunts them, but when you bring out the best technology we have to record it, there's nothing there. So today, we're going to dive into this truly bizarre auditory mystery.
So, what does it actually sound like? Well, when researchers in Taos, New Mexico started surveying people back in the 90s, they got a description that was incredibly consistent. Picture this. It sounds like a big truck idling just out of sight. A deep, pulsating drone that you can almost feel as much as you can hear. It's not super loud, but it's always there, and it almost always gets worse at night and when you're indoors.
And this is where things get really weird. Because this isn't just about a noise complaint. It's a full-blown scientific paradox. You have people hearing it, describing it in detail. It's seriously affecting their lives. But when investigators show up with super-sensitive microphones, they get nothing. Silence. This single question is what makes the hum one of the most baffling phenomena out there.
Right, so let's start with the absolute basic problem here. We have a sound that absolutely exists for the person hearing it, but it seems to be completely invisible to our measuring instruments. It's like it lives in some strange space between our perception and physical reality.
And look, we're not just talking about one or two people with overactive imaginations. In places where the hum is a known issue, like Taos or Kokomo, Indiana, studies have found that roughly 2% of the population can hear it. Now, that's a small minority, for sure, but it's still a pretty significant number of people all experiencing the exact same unexplainable thing.
The people who hear it all report this really strange set of characteristics. It's low frequency, you can feel it like a vibration, and it gets worse indoors. But there are two things here that just break all the normal rules of sound. First, earplugs do absolutely nothing. And second, if someone hearing it gets in their car and drives out of town, the hum just vanishes. It's somehow tied to a specific location.
So, with this many people being affected, official investigations were going to happen. Scientists, engineers, they have spent decades trying to track this phantom sound to its source. And, well, their efforts really just show how deep this mystery goes.
The two biggest pushes to figure this out in the United States happened about a decade apart. The first was in Taos, New Mexico, where it got so bad that congressional action kicked off a huge multi-agency effort. Then, in 2003, the city of Kokomo, Indiana, decided to fund its own massive study to try and solve the mystery for its tormented residents.
And this chart just perfectly illustrates the frustration. They threw everything they had at this problem. In both Taos and Kokomo, the teams used the most sensitive acoustic gear, seismic sensors to check for vibrations in the ground, even electromagnetic field scanners. They looked for everything: industrial noise, gas pipelines, power lines, you name it. The result? Nothing. Zilch. Not a single external source could explain what all these people were hearing.
So this was a huge turning point. The early investigations had systematically ruled out every obvious culprit. The conclusion was, well, it was inescapable. Whatever the hum was, it wasn't a normal sound traveling through the air. And that forced researchers to start looking at some much more unconventional explanations.
Which leads us to our first major theory. What if the source isn't out there in the town or in the ground or in the power lines? What if the sound is actually being generated inside the human body itself?
Okay, this brings us to a really fascinating and totally real biological thing called spontaneous otoacoustic emissions, or SOAs. To put it simply, this is when your inner ear, the part called the cochlea, produces its own tiny, audible sounds. That's right, your own ears can literally generate noise that's real enough to be measured by a sensitive microphone placed right in your ear canal.
Now check out this comparison. Researchers discovered that the hum shares a frankly startling number of properties with these internal ear sounds. Both of them can interact with outside tones to create weird beats. Both can be affected or even stopped just by moving your head a certain way. And this is wild. Some people who hear the hum found it could be stopped with aspirin, which is the same drug known to suppress these SOAEs. And they both happen to affect a similar small percentage of the population. The parallels are pretty striking. Now this chart, this is really the clincher for the whole sound from within theory. It basically shows that the way the hum interacts with other sounds, how it syncs up and creates beats, can be perfectly modeled by something called a Van der Pol oscillator. Now, you don't need to know the math, but what's crucial is that this model is used specifically for nonlinear biological rhythms.
The hum behaves exactly like a biological process, not like an external physical sound wave.
Okay, but the SOA theory isn't a perfect fit. It doesn't really explain why the hum is tied to a specific place or why earplugs don't work. And that leads us to an even more radical theory. What if the hum isn't a sound at all? What if it's a direct signal to the brain?
This is a known phenomenon called the microwave auditory effect, sometimes called the Frey effect. It's what happens when certain electromagnetic fields interact directly with the brain's temporal lobe, making you perceive a sound. The hearing, in this case, happens inside the brain itself, completely bypassing the normal mechanics of the ear.
Now this theory, it neatly explains all the clues that the other theory struggles with. If the signal is bypassing your ears, then of course earplugs wouldn't work. It would also explain why the hum is tied to a specific location. There has to be some kind of external electromagnetic source. And you know what? Investigators in both Taos and Kokomo did measure elevated EM fields in some of the homes. Plus, a lot of residents said the hum started right after utility work was done on power or phone lines. This could even explain all the weird reports of strange animal behavior, since a lot of animals are way more sensitive to these fields than we are.
So after all these decades of investigation, we are left not with one clear answer, but with two really compelling competing theories. And each one explains a different piece of this incredible puzzle.
So on one side, you have the sound from within theory, the idea that the hum is basically a type of spontaneous otoacoustic emission. This theory perfectly explains its weird acoustic behaviors, and it fits those mathematical models of a biological oscillator. But on the other side, you have the signal to the brain theory, the microwave auditory effect. This one does a much better job explaining why the hum is tied to a physical location, and why it seems to just ignore things like earplug.
And that really just leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. The phantom hum challenges our whole idea of what sound and perception even are. It forces us to ask, is something only real if our current tools can measure it? Is this whole story about a strange trick of human biology? Or is it about a real-world phenomenon that exists just beyond the limits of our current scientific understanding? For now, the hum remains a ghost in the machine.